The Bone Singer.
A dark fantasy tale. Prologue. The Sound of Death.
In the ancient kingdom of Volmora, where the mountains touched the clouds and the forests grew dark and deep, there existed a power that most people had forgotten. It was called bone singing, the art of speaking to the dead through their remains, of drawing forth memories and truths from skulls and skeletons, of making the bones themselves sing with the voices of those who had once lived. The bone singers had once been honored and respected, advisors to kings, solvers of mysteries, guides for the lost souls who could not find their way to the afterlife. But that was long ago, in the days when people still believed in magic and respected the boundary between life and death. Now, in these diminished times, bone singing was forbidden. The art was declared necromancy, dark magic, an abomination against nature. The last of the bone singers had been hunted down and executed 50 years ago, their knowledge lost, their songs silenced forever. Or so everyone believed. But in a remote village at the edge of the kingdom, in a small cottage hidden deep in the woods, there lived a young woman who could hear what no one else could hear. She could hear the whispers of the dead. She could hear the songs that bones sang in the darkness. Her name was Kira Ashborne, and she was the last bone singer. Part 1. The Girl Who Heard Bones. Kira had always heard them. Ever since she was a small child, she could hear the faint whispers that came from graveyards, from burial mounds, from the bones of animals that died in the forest. At first she thought everyone could hear them, but she quickly learned that speaking of such things frightened people. Her mother had warned her in hushed and urgent tones never to tell anyone what she could hear. "You have the gift, my daughter," her mother had said, holding Kira's small hands in her own, "the gift of our ancestors. But it is a dangerous gift in these times. The king's men hunt those with such powers. They call us necromancers and burn us as witches. You must hide what you are. You must never let anyone know." And so Kira had learned to be silent. She learned to ignore the whispers, to pretend she heard nothing when she walked past the village cemetery, to keep her face neutral when the bones of a deer in the forest called out to her, telling her how it had died, showing her memories of running through the trees in moonlight. Her mother had been a bone singer too, in secret. She had taught Kira some of the old songs, the ancient words that could make bones speak more clearly, that could bring comfort to restless spirits, that could help the dead find peace. But she had died when Kira was 15, taking most of her knowledge with her. Now, 3 years later, Kira lived alone in her mother's cottage, working as a healer for the village. She gathered herbs, made medicines,
set broken bones, though the irony of that phrase never escaped her. She could hear the bones singing in pain, telling her exactly where they were fractured. The villagers thought she was simply skilled. They didn't know she could hear what their bodies were saying, that their very skeletons whispered to her of injuries and illnesses. It was a lonely life, keeping such secrets, but it was a safe life, and Kira had learned that safety was worth the loneliness. Until the day the murders began. Dash, dash, dash. The first body was found on a cold autumn morning. Old Willem, the village blacksmith, discovered it while walking to his forge before dawn. It was a young man from a neighboring village, barely 20 years old, lying in a ditch by the road. His throat had been cut, his purse was gone, and the expression frozen on his dead face was one of absolute terror. The village elder called it a robbery gone wrong. Bandits, he said. Dangerous times. People should travel in groups, be home before dark, carry weapons. But Kira knew it was something else. She knew because when they brought the body to her cottage, she was, after all, the closest thing the village had to someone who could examine the dead. She heard what the bones were saying. And what they sang was not a song of simple robbery. The bones sang of cold, of darkness deeper than night, of something that wasn't quite human, reaching out with fingers like ice. They sang of the victim's last moments, not just fear, but a supernatural dread, a terror that went beyond the fear of death. The bones sang of something ancient and hungry. But Kira said nothing. She examined the body, noted the cut throat, mentioned nothing about the strange bruises on the young man's wrists that looked almost like handprints but weren't quite the right shape. She kept her knowledge to herself, as she always had. The second body was found 3 days later. A traveling merchant, found in the forest, killed in the same way. Throat cut, valuables gone, face frozen in terror. And again, the bones sang to Kira of something cold and wrong, something that shouldn't exist. The third body came 2 days after that. Then a fourth. Then a fifth. Panic began to spread through the village. People barricaded their doors at night. No one traveled alone. The village elder sent word to the king's guard, asking for help, for soldiers to hunt down whatever bandits were terrorizing the countryside. But Kira knew soldiers wouldn't help, because what was killing people wasn't bandits. It was something else. Something the bones knew, but couldn't quite explain in words she understood. And she also knew something else, something that terrified her. The killings were moving in a pattern, a spiral, and the spiral was tightening. The murders were getting closer and closer to the village, to her cottage, to her. Whatever this thing was, it was hunting, and somehow she had the terrible feeling it was hunting for her. Part 2. The Hunter in the Dark. On the night of the 6th murder, Kira couldn't sleep. She sat in her cottage, herbs spread across her table, pretending to work on medicines, but really just listening. Listening to the whispers that always surrounded her, the constant background noise of bones singing their small songs, the mouse that had died in her walls last winter, the deer whose skull hung over her fireplace, the bones of her mother buried in the garden. And then she heard something new, something that made her blood run cold. Footsteps. But not the footsteps of something living. These were the sounds of bones clicking together, of something that walked on legs that shouldn't be able to walk, of joints that moved without muscle or sinew. Kira moved to her window and looked out into the darkness. At first, she saw nothing. Then, as her eyes adjusted, she saw it. A figure stood at the edge of the forest, barely visible in the shadows. It was tall, too tall, and thin, too thin, and it moved in a way that was fundamentally wrong. Its limbs bent at strange angles. Its head tilted too far to one side. And even from this distance, Kira could see that it wasn't entirely solid. It seemed to flicker and shift, as though it existed partially in this world and partially in another. And it was looking directly at her cottage. Kira's hands shook as she stepped back from the window. She knew what this was, though she had never seen one before. Her mother had told her stories, warnings from the old texts. This was a bone walker, a creature made from the stolen bones of the dead, animated by dark magic, sent forth to hunt and kill. Bone walkers were creations of necromancers, her mother had said. But there were no necromancers left. They had all been killed or driven into hiding. So who had made this thing, and why was it here? The creature took a step forward, toward her cottage, then another. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, but purposeful. Kira's mind raced. She had to do something. She couldn't just hide and hope it would go away. Bone walkers didn't give up. They hunted until they found their target. And this one's target was clearly her. But why? Why would anyone send a bone walker after her? She was nobody, just a village healer, keeping her powers hidden, bothering no one. Unless whoever had created this thing knew what she was, knew she was a bone singer. But that meant there was another practitioner of the forbidden arts out there. Someone who knew she existed. Someone who wanted her dead, or, and this thought was somehow more terrifying, wanted to find her for some other purpose.
The Bone Walker was at her garden fence now. Its skeletal fingers, for Kira could see now that its hands were indeed just bones, held together by some dark force, reaching for the gate. Kira made a decision. She couldn't fight this thing with weapons or hide from it behind locked doors. But she had one advantage. She was a bone singer, and this creature was made of bones. She opened her mouth and began to sing. The song was one her mother had taught her, one of the oldest and most powerful. It was a song of command, of dominion over the dead and their remains. The words were in the old tongue, the language that predated the kingdom, the speech that bones understood better than they understood any human voice. The effect was immediate. The Bone Walker stopped mid-step, its entire body going rigid. Kira could see it struggling against her song, trying to move forward, but her voice held it in place. She sang louder, stronger, pouring all her will into the melody. And slowly, painfully, the Bone Walker began to change. Its flickering form became more solid, more visible, and Kira could see what it truly was. A thing built from the bones of at least 3 different people, their remains woven together with threads of dark magic, animated by a will that was not its own. The bones sang to her as she commanded them. They sang of pain and violation, of being torn from their rest, of being forced into this horrible mockery of life. They begged for release, for peace, for an end to their torment. Kira's song shifted, became gentler, more compassionate. She sang of rest and silence, of earth and peace, of letting go and returning to the quiet sleep of death. And the Bone Walker collapsed. It didn't fall apart dramatically or explode into dust. It simply stopped. The dark magic holding it together released, and the bones it was made from fell to the ground like a pile of kindling, finally at rest. Kira stopped singing and stood in her doorway, breathing hard, staring at the scattered bones in her garden. She had done it. She had stopped the creature. But now she had a bigger problem. Whoever had sent the Bone Walker would know it had failed, and they would know that someone with the power to command bones had destroyed it. They would come themselves, and Kira had the terrible feeling that this hunter would be far more dangerous than any animated skeleton. Part 3. The Necromancer. Kira didn't sleep that night. She spent the hours before dawn gathering the bones from her garden and burying them properly, singing the old songs of rest over each one, trying to give the violated dead some measure of peace. As the sun rose, she made a decision. She couldn't stay here. Whoever had sent the Bone Walker knew where she lived. They would come again, and next time she might not be able to defend herself. She needed to leave. But more than that, she needed answers. She needed to know who was hunting her and why. And there was only one person she could think of who might have those answers. Old Marcus, the scholar who lived in the city of Thornhaven, 3 days' journey to the south. Marcus had been a friend of her mother's. He was one of the few people outside her family who knew what Kira was, who knew about bone singing and the old arts. If anyone could help her understand what was happening, it would be him. Kira packed quickly. Some clothes, her mother's book of songs, hidden in a false-bottomed pack, herbs and medicines, what little coin she had saved. She left a note for the village elder, saying she had to visit a sick relative and would return in a few weeks. It wasn't much of a lie. Marcus wasn't family by blood, but he was the closest thing to family she had left. She set out as the village was waking, taking the forest paths rather than the main road. The journey would be longer, but safer, or so she hoped. For 2 days she traveled without incident. She slept in hollow trees, foraged for food, avoided other travelers. The bones in the forest sang to her constantly. Deer and rabbits and birds, all the small deaths that nature dealt every day. But none sang of anything unusual, anything threatening. On the 3rd day, as she was nearing Thornhaven, everything changed. She was following a game trail through a particularly dense section of forest when she heard it. A song unlike any she had heard before. It wasn't the simple whisper of animal bones or the quiet murmur of old graves. This was a chorus, a symphony of bones, all singing together in horrible harmony. And they were singing of death, recent death, violent death. Kira's instinct was to run, to turn around and flee as fast as she could. But something made her move forward instead, toward the source of that terrible song. She needed to know, needed to understand what she was facing. The game trail opened into a small clearing, and there, in the center, was a sight that would haunt Kira's nightmares for the rest of her life. A circle had been drawn on the ground in what looked like bone ash. Inside the circle were the remains of at least a dozen people. Not whole bodies, but pieces. Bones arranged in deliberate patterns, forming complex symbols that Kira recognized from her mother's books. These were the marks of true necromancy, of the darkest arts, of magic that defied death itself. And standing in the center of this horror was a man. He was perhaps 50, with gray hair and a lean, angular face. He wore dark robes marked with silver runes, and his hands were stained with what looked like old blood. He was speaking words in the old tongue, words that made Kira's stomach turn, words that twisted the natural order of things. But what terrified her most was that she recognized him, not personally, but from her mother's descriptions, from the warnings in the old texts. This was Mordren Blackbone, the most powerful necromancer of the previous generation, the man who had supposedly been killed 50 years ago, when the king's guard hunted down the last of the bone singers and necromancers. But he wasn't dead. He was very much alive. And he was looking directly at her. "Ah," Mordren said, his voice cold and precise. "The little bone singer. I've been looking for you." Kira took a step back, her hand moving toward the knife at her belt. Not that a knife would do much good against someone with this kind of power. "I sent my walker to bring you to me," Mordren continued, moving toward her with slow, deliberate steps. "But you destroyed it. Very impressive. Your mother taught you well." "You knew my mother?" Kira's voice came out as barely a whisper. "I knew of her. Cassandra Ashborne, one of the last true bone singers. She hid herself well, lived quietly, tried to pretend she was just a simple healer. But I always knew she existed, just as I knew she would pass her gift to her daughter." "What do you want from me?" Kira demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. Mordren smiled, and it was like watching a snake smile. "I want what your mother wouldn't give me. I want you to help me complete the great work." "I don't know what that means." "No, you wouldn't. Your mother kept you ignorant, taught you only the barest elements of bone singing. She was afraid of the power, afraid of what it could truly accomplish." Mordren gestured at the bone circle around him. "But I am not afraid. I have spent 50 years researching, studying, perfecting the art. And I am close, so close to achieving something that has never been done before." "What?" Kira asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "Immortality," Mordren said simply. "True immortality. Not the half-life of a bone walker, not the cursed existence of the undead. True, eternal life. And to achieve it, I need one final component, the song of a living bone singer, freely given, woven into the ritual." Kira's blood ran cold. "I'll never help you." "Oh, but you will," Mordren said, and his hand moved in a gesture that sent invisible force crashing into Kira, knocking her to the ground. "One way or another, either you help me willingly, or I extract the knowledge I need from your bones after I kill you. Either way, I will complete the great work." Kira struggled to her feet, her head spinning from the impact. She needed to run, to escape. But Mordren was already speaking more words of power, and she could feel the bones in the ground responding, rising, beginning to form another bone walker to trap her. But then, as the bones began to sing their terrible song of animation, Kira realized something. She could hear them. She could hear every bone in this clearing, including the ones Mordren was trying to control. And she had been taught by her mother to sing louder than any necromancer. So she sang. She sang with all the power in her lungs, all the will in her heart, all the knowledge her mother had given her. She sang the song of rest, of peace, of silence. She sang directly to the bones Mordren was trying to animate, and she sang of their right to sleep undisturbed. The bones listened. They always listened to a bone singer before they listened to a necromancer. That was the difference between the two arts. Necromancers commanded, but bone singers asked. And the dead, tired of being commanded, preferred to be asked. The bone walker that was forming fell apart before it could take its first step. The dark energy Mordren had woven into his ritual circle began to unravel. The old necromancer's eyes widened in shock and fury. "You dare!" he shouted, and released another blast of force toward Kira. But Kira was already running. She fled into the forest, branches whipping at her face, her pack bouncing against her back. Behind her, she could hear Mordren shouting, cursing, and the sound of bones rattling as he tried to animate more creatures to chase her. But Kira sang as she ran, sang the song of confusion, sang to the bones to forget how to move, to lose their way, to fall silent and still. Her mother had taught her this song for situations exactly like this. "If you ever face a necromancer," her mother had said, "remember that your song is older and purer than their commands. Sing true, and the bones will listen to you." Kira sang true, and the bones listened. By the time Mordren could animate new bone walkers to pursue her, Kira had a significant lead. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs threatened to give out, and then she ran some more. She didn't slow until the sun was setting, and she had put miles between herself and that horrible clearing. Only then did she stop, collapsing against a tree, gasping for breath, her entire body shaking with exhaustion and terror. She had escaped. Barely. But Mordren knew she existed now, knew what she could do, and he wouldn't stop hunting her. She had to reach Marcus, had to warn him, had to figure out how to stop Mordren before he completed his great work, whatever that truly meant. Because Kira had the terrible feeling that if Mordren achieved his goal of immortality, it wouldn't just be her life that was at stake. It would be the natural order of life and death itself. Dash, dash, dash.
Part 4. The Scholar's Tower.
Kira reached Thornhaven on the 4th day, exhausted, hungry, and constantly looking over her shoulder. The city was larger than she remembered from her single visit as a child. A sprawling collection of stone buildings, narrow streets, and tall towers that served as homes for the wealthy and workshops for scholars. Marcus lived in one of these towers, in the Scholars' Quarter, where those who studied ancient texts and forgotten lore made their homes. Finding it wasn't difficult. Her mother had described it many times, and the tower was marked with a symbol that only those with knowledge of the old arts would recognize: a stylized bone rendered in faded paint above the door. Kira knocked, her hand trembling with exhaustion. For a long moment there was no answer, and she began to fear that Marcus was gone, or dead, or that she had come all this way for nothing. Then the door opened a crack, and a suspicious eye peered out at her. "I don't buy from peddlers," a gravelly voice said. "Go away." "Master Marcus," Kira said quickly, before the door could close. "I'm Kira Ashborne, Cassandra's daughter. She said if I ever needed help—" The door flew open. Standing there was an old man, perhaps 70, with wild white hair and a beard that hadn't been trimmed in months. He wore robes covered in ink stains and what looked like herb residue. But his eyes were sharp and intelligent, and they widened as he looked at Kira. "Cassandra's daughter," he breathed. "By the old gods, you look just like her. Come in, quickly. If you're here, something terrible has happened." Kira stumbled into the tower, and Marcus shut the door behind her, throwing multiple bolts and speaking a word that made the air around the door shimmer. Wards, Kira realized. Protection spells. "Sit," Marcus commanded, gesturing to a chair piled with books. He swept them onto the floor without ceremony. "You look half dead. When did you last eat?" "Yesterday morning, I think." Kira's sense of time had become unreliable. Marcus muttered something uncomplimentary about young people not taking care of themselves, and shuffled off to what Kira assumed was a kitchen area. He returned moments later with bread, cheese, dried meat, and a cup of something that smelled strongly of herbs. "Eat," he ordered. "Drink. Then tell me everything." Kira obeyed, and as the food settled in her stomach and the herbal drink, some kind of restorative tonic, she thought, brought clarity back to her mind, she told Marcus everything. The murders in her village, the bone walker, her flight, the encounter with Mordren Blackbone. Marcus's expression grew darker with every word. When she finished, he sat in silence for a long moment, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Mordren Blackbone," he said finally. "I had hoped the reports of his death were true. I should have known better. A man with that much knowledge of death would find a way to cheat it." "You know him?" Kira asked. "I knew of him when I was younger. He was already powerful then, already pushing the boundaries of what was acceptable in the study of bones and death. When the king declared bone singing and necromancy forbidden, Mordren didn't go into hiding like the others. He went deeper into his research, became more extreme, more willing to do terrible things in pursuit of power. We thought the king's guard had killed him 50 years ago. Clearly, we were wrong. He said he needed my song for his great work," Kira said. "Something about achieving true immortality." Marcus's face went pale. "He's attempting the eternal binding." "What's that?" The old scholar stood and moved to one of his many bookshelves, running his finger along the spines until he found what he was looking for. He pulled out a massive tome, so old that its leather binding was cracked and faded. "The eternal binding is a theoretical ritual," Marcus explained, opening the book to a page covered in complex diagrams and text in the old tongue. "It was proposed by necromancers in the ancient days, before the kingdom existed, when the boundaries between life and death were more flexible. The idea is to bind one's soul not to one's body, which inevitably decays, but to the fabric of death itself, to become one with the boundary between worlds, neither alive nor dead, but something in between, something eternal." "Is it possible?" Kira asked, leaning over to look at the diagrams. They made her head hurt. Complex patterns of bones and symbols, equations of life force and death energy that she couldn't begin to understand. "In theory, yes," Marcus said, "but the cost would be enormous. It would require the death of hundreds, perhaps thousands. Their life force would have to be harvested, their bones arranged in specific patterns. And then, this is the crucial part, a living bone singer would have to sing the ritual into being. Only a bone singer has the power to bridge life and death in the way the eternal binding requires. So he needs me to complete it." "Then I'm the only one who can stop him," Kira said quietly. "Stop him? Child, you should be running as far and fast as you can. Mordren is one of the most powerful necromancers who has ever lived. You're barely trained, still learning your own powers. You can't." "I have to try," Kira interrupted. "You said it yourself. I'm the last bone singer. If I run, if I hide, Mordren will eventually find me. And if he gets what he needs from me, either willingly or by killing me and taking it from my dead bones, then he wins. The natural order of life and death gets destroyed. But if I face him now, if I try to stop him while I still have the advantage of being alive, of being able to sing." She trailed off, not sure how to finish the sentence.
Marcus studied her for a long moment. Then he sighed deeply and closed the ancient book. "You have your mother's courage," he said. "She would be proud, and probably horrified that you're planning something this reckless." He moved to another shelf and began pulling down books, scrolls, small vials of substances Kira couldn't identify. "If you're going to do this, you'll need more training, more knowledge. Your mother taught you the basics, but there are songs she didn't know, techniques that have been lost for generations. I've spent my life collecting this knowledge, preserving it. If you're going to face Mordren, you'll need every advantage I can give you."
"How long will it take?" Kira asked.
"To teach you everything? Years. To teach you enough to have a chance? A few days, maybe a week."
"I don't think we have a week," Kira said. "Mordren knows I'm alive. He knows I escaped. He'll be coming."
"Then we work quickly," Marcus said, "and we pray to whatever gods still listen that it's enough."
Dash, dash, dash. Part 5. The Song of Undoing. For 3 days and 3 nights, Kira barely slept. Marcus drove her mercilessly, teaching her songs she had never heard, techniques her mother had never known. Some of the knowledge came from books so old they fell apart as Marcus turned their pages. Some came from his own research, theories he had spent decades developing. He taught her the Song of Severing, which could cut the connection between an animated creature and the necromancer controlling it. He taught her the Song of Binding, which could trap a spirit or dark entity in place. He taught her the Song of True Sight, which would let her see the threads of magic that necromancers wove, the connections between death and life. But most importantly, he taught her the Song of Undoing. "It's the most powerful song a bone singer can use," Marcus explained on the 3rd night, his voice hoarse from hours of instruction. "And the most dangerous. It doesn't just silence bones or free spirits. It undoes death magic entirely, unravels the spells that defy the natural order. If used properly, it could destroy the entire framework of Mordren's ritual." "And if used improperly?" Kira asked. Marcus's expression was grim. "It could unravel you as well. The Song of Undoing doesn't discriminate. It unmakes death magic, and a bone singer's power is fundamentally tied to death. You walk the line between life and death every time you sing. This song could push you across that line permanently." "So I could die." "Worse than die. You could become neither living nor dead, trapped between states forever." Kira absorbed this information silently. Then she said, "Teach me anyway." Marcus did. He spent hours going over the pronunciation of each word in the old tongue, making her repeat them until they were perfect. He made her practice the melody until she could sing it in her sleep. He explained the theory behind it, how it worked, what it targeted. The key, he said, is to direct it precisely. Don't just sing it into the void. Sing it at the specific pattern of magic you want to unmake. Focus on Mordren's ritual, on the eternal binding itself. If you can unravel that while leaving yourself intact, you might survive. Might, Kira repeated. Magic this powerful doesn't come with guarantees. On the fourth day, as Kira was practicing the Song of Undoing for what felt like the 1,000th time, Marcus suddenly held up his hand for silence. "Do you feel that?" he asked quietly. Kira extended her awareness, the way her mother had taught her, listening for the whispers of bones. And she felt it, a presence approaching the city. Multiple presences, actually. Bone walkers, dozens of them, maybe more. "He's coming," she said. "Faster than I expected," Marcus muttered. "He must have been preparing while tracking you. He'll attack the city to draw you out." "I can't let innocent people die because of me," Kira said, moving toward her pack and the supplies she had prepared. "No, you can't," Marcus agreed. He held out a small vial filled with silvery liquid. "This is essence of starlight, distilled and preserved. It's toxic to creatures of death and darkness. One drop on a blade will destroy a bone walker. I have a dozen vials. It's not much against an army, but it's something." Kira took the vials carefully. "Thank you. For everything." "Don't thank me yet," Marcus said. "Thank me when you survive." He paused, then added, "Your mother was my dearest friend. I failed to protect her. I won't fail to help her daughter. Whatever happens tonight, know that you honor her memory with your courage." Kira embraced the old scholar briefly, then gathered her supplies and headed for the door. "Kira," Marcus called after her, "remember, the Song of Undoing is a last resort. Only use it if there's no other choice. And if you do use it, make it count." "I will," Kira promised, and stepped out into the night. The city was in chaos. The Bone Walkers had reached the outer walls, and the city guard was trying desperately to hold them back. But swords and spears did little against creatures that felt no pain, that could be cut apart and still keep coming as long as the Necromancer commanded them. Kira moved through the streets, following the sound of battle and the terrible symphony of bone songs that only she could hear. The Bone Walkers sang of pain and violation, of being forced into service against their will. They wanted rest. They wanted peace. They wanted to be left alone in the quiet darkness of death. Kira sang to them as she ran. She sang the song of release,
the simple melody her mother had taught her first, the one that offered freedom to the tormented dead. And wherever her song reached, bone-walkers collapsed, their stolen bones finally allowed to rest. But there were so many. For every one she freed, 2 more appeared. Mordren had been busy indeed, gathering bones from across the kingdom, building his army of the dead. Kira fought her way to the city square, knowing instinctively that this was where Mordren would be. He was a necromancer. He would want to be at the center of his power, surrounded by his creations, commanding them from a position of strength. She was right. Mordren stood in the middle of the square, his arms raised, dark energy crackling around him as he directed his bone-walkers. He saw Kira approaching and smiled. "The little bone singer comes to me at last," he called out. "How convenient! I was prepared to level this entire city to find you, but you've saved me the trouble." "I won't help you complete your ritual," Kira said, drawing the knife Marcus had given her, one edge wet with starlight essence. "I'll die first." "That can be arranged," Mordren replied. "Dead or alive, I only need your bones for the final component. Your willingness made things easier, but it's not required." He gestured, and 6 bone-walkers moved to surround Kira. She sang the Song of Severing, trying to cut their connection to Mordren, but his will was too strong. He had been practicing this art for 50 years. She had been learning for 3 days. The bone-walkers closed in. Kira slashed with her knife, the starlight essence burning through bone, destroying 2 of the creatures. But the others grabbed her, their skeletal hands impossibly strong, forcing her to her knees. "You're skilled for one so young," Mordren said, approaching her. "Your mother taught you well. It's a pity you didn't have more time to develop your gift. But then, that's the nature of mortality, isn't it? Always running out of time. Which is why I'm going to transcend it." He pulled out a knife of his own, this one made from bone, its edge gleaming with dark magic. "This won't hurt for long," he said. "And think, your bones will be part of something greater than you ever could have achieved in life. You'll be the foundation of true immortality." Kira struggled against the bone-walkers holding her, but their grip was unbreakable. Mordren raised the knife, preparing to strike, and Kira made her choice. She opened her mouth and sang the Song of Undoing. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The dark magic holding the bone-walkers together unraveled instantly. The creatures collapsed into piles of ordinary bones, no longer animated, no longer suffering. The black energy surrounding Mordren
flickered and faded. The connection he had built to the forces of death, the power he had cultivated for 50 years, began to come apart. But the song didn't stop there. Kira could feel it pulling at her own essence, at the part of her that could hear bones and speak to the dead. The song of undoing didn't care that she was its singer. It unmade death magic wherever it found it, and her gift was death magic, woven into her very soul. Mordren staggered back, his face twisting with rage and disbelief. "What have you done?" he screamed. "You've destroyed it all. 50 years of work." But his voice was growing weaker. Without his connection to death magic, without the power he had built, he was just an old man. A very old man. The magic had been keeping him alive, sustaining him far beyond his natural lifespan. Now, without it, age caught up with him all at once. He aged before Kira's eyes, his skin wrinkling and sagging, his hair falling out, his bones becoming brittle. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a wheeze came out. Then he collapsed, and by the time he hit the ground, he was little more than dust and fragments. Kira's song ended. She fell to her hands and knees, gasping for breath, feeling as though she had been torn apart and barely stitched back together. She had survived. Somehow, impossibly, she had survived the Song of Undoing. But she could feel that something had changed. Her connection to the bones, the whispers she had heard all her life, were quieter now, muted, as though a door had been partially closed. She had paid a price for using that song. She was still a bone singer, but diminished, weaker, more human than she had been before. Marcus found her there, still kneeling in the square among the scattered bones that had once been Mordren's army. "You did it," he said softly, helping her to her feet. "You destroyed him and his ritual. The Song of Undoing worked." "But at a cost," Kira replied, her voice hoarse from singing. "I can barely hear them anymore. The bones. They're still there, still whispering, but it's like they're very far away." Marcus examined her with his practiced scholar's eye, then nodded slowly. "The Song of Undoing unmade part of your gift along with Mordren's magic. But it didn't destroy you completely. You're still a bone singer, Kira, just changed, different, perhaps more balanced between life and death than before. Is that good or bad?" "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "But you're alive. Given what you faced, that's more than good enough." Epilogue. The new song. Kira didn't return to her village. There was nothing for her there now, and too many questions would be asked about where she had been, what she had seen. Instead, she stayed in Thornhaven, in Marcus's tower,
learning from his vast collection of knowledge. Her gift had changed, but it hadn't disappeared. She could still hear the bones, still sing to them, still help the restless dead find peace. But now she could also do something she hadn't been able to do before. She could choose when to listen and when not to. The constant background whisper of bones that had accompanied her entire life was now something she could control, turn on and off at will. In a strange way, the song of undoing had freed her as much as it had diminished her. She used her remaining power carefully, sparingly. She helped the city guard identify murder victims when their bones could sing of their killers. She brought peace to haunted places where the dead could not rest. She advised Marcus in his research, offering insights only a bone singer could provide. And slowly, over months and years, she began to develop something new, not the old bone singing of her ancestors, but a new art, one that balanced her diminished gift with scholarly knowledge, one that respected the boundary between life and death while still being able to cross it when necessary. She called it the New Song, and she began to teach it to others, those with the faintest touch of the gift, those who could hear just the barest whisper of bones. She taught them to listen with respect, to speak with compassion, to help the dead without violating them. The old order of bone singers had been destroyed by fear and persecution. Perhaps, Kira thought, the new order could be built on understanding and balance. It was a long path ahead. But Kira had time now. She had survived Mordren. She had survived the Song of Undoing. She had learned that death was not something to be commanded or defied, but something to be respected and understood. And every night, before she slept, she sang a quiet song, not for the dead, but for her mother, wherever her spirit rested. A song of thanks for the gift that had been passed down. A song of peace for all those who had suffered at Mordren's hands. And a song of hope that the balance between life and death would be preserved. The bones listened. They always listened to a true bone singer. And in their whispers, Kira thought she sometimes heard her mother's voice, approving, loving, at peace. The watch continued. The songs endured. And the dead rested easier, knowing someone still sang for them. The end.